Hello viewers, welcome to this episode of Healthy India. In the initial episodes of this series, we talked about diabetes in India, how it is increasing, how the numbers now exceed 77 million. And we also discussed strategies to overcome or meet this challenge. But the focus has largely been on type 2 diabetes and on adults. Meaning when we talk of diabetes and the increase in numbers, we are typically talking of adults, and we are talking of a variety of diabetes or a type of diabetes which is called type 2 diabetes. Let me revisit type 1 versus type 2 for you once. Type 2 diabetes is brought about by a combination of insulin resistance, that is resistance to the action of insulin, and insulin deficiency, that is a secretion defect of the pancreas which leads to less insulin production. Type 1 diabetes is what happens simply because of lack of insulin. That is a secretory defect of the pancreas where our pancreas does not make enough insulin and therefore we get type 1 diabetes. This, of course, is often caused by autoimmune mechanisms, but we'll discuss that as we go along. So the increasing burden of diabetes in India is largely comprised of type 2 diabetes. And of course, as we said, the age of onset has come down and young adults are getting affected and even children. But today we are going to focus on diabetes in children specifically. And in children, it is type 1 diabetes or the diabetes that happens because of lack of insulin that is the dominant type of diabetes. So to discuss diabetes in children, I have two eminent colleagues for you. We have Professor Anju Seth, who is Director Professor of Pediatrics at the Lady Hardinge Medical College. And we have Dr. Ganesh Jevalikar, pediatric endocrinologist at the Max Healthcare Network. We will be talking about diabetes in children because that actually perhaps is one of the most important yet one of the most neglected areas. Later in the program, we'll be joined by Dr. Parthasarathy Kar from the UK, who has done a lot of work with the NHS about different types of diabetes and empowering children with type 1 diabetes. We'll move to Dr. Ganesh first. And we just discussed type 1 and type 2, and we talked about children versus adults. So what type of diabetes do children get? What types of diabetes do children get?
So in children, you can get many varieties or many types of diabetes. But as you pointed out, that majority or the bulk of diabetes is type 1 diabetes. So if we have to say amongst 100% cases, nearly 90% cases in childhood, by childhood I mean up to 18 years of age, is type 1 diabetes. Increasingly, we are seeing type 2 diabetes in children, particularly in urban areas where the prevalence of obesity is increasing. And they are responsible for about 6 to 8% cases of diabetes in children or adults.
So you are telling me, Dr. Ganesh, that of course we have type 1 diabetes, which is the dominant diabetes in children. That is the insulin requiring or insulin deficient diabetes. Yes. But as we discussed earlier, not just young adults, but even some children are getting affected by type 2 diabetes, which is traditionally thought to occur only in, above 30 or 40 years of age.
Yeah, so if we have to go a few years back, maybe 20, 30 years back, if you say child with diabetes, it would, unless proven otherwise some rare condition, it would mean type 1 diabetes. But that is sadly not true anymore. And we are seeing a worrying trend of increasing type 2 diabetes in childhood and adolescence. And that is thanks to increasing obesity and the changing lifestyle in typical modern urban lifestyle.
So bulk of the diabetes is still type 1, but we have to be alert in certain segments, in certain types of patients about the possibility of type 2 diabetes in children also. So when the moment we are saying type 1 diabetes is the common type of diabetes in children, it means we are talking of insulin, we are talking of lack of insulin as being the primary or perhaps a sole defect sometimes. We'll come back to that. What do you think, how should one recognize diabetes, Dr. Anju? You have so much experience in this. And one of the biggest challenges in our country is that people don't suspect diabetes in children. And we all have seen patients, and even the other day I saw somebody brought in very late because the symptoms were on for weeks before someone actually suspected, because they think a child will not get diabetes. So you want to emphasize the symptoms that should alert our viewers that the child could be having type 1 diabetes or diabetes.
Yes, thank you. An important thing to remember is that children with diabetes show a very fast progression of symptoms, vis-a-vis adults with diabetes, where often diabetes is picked up during screening. In children, the symptoms progress very fast, and the cardinal symptoms that a child with diabetes may have is, number 1, increased thirst, number 2, increased passage of urine, and number 3, increased appetite. However, despite increased appetite, the child may still be losing weight. There might be recent onset bedwetting in a child, and sometimes in situations when such situations exist, alert parent may notice ants coming around urine. If diabetes is not picked up at this stage, and it is not uncommon for it not to be picked up, because these are not very specific symptoms, and as you rightly said, parents don't really think too much about it, the child can deteriorate very, very fast. And increasingly, the child becomes weak, dehydrated, lethargic. He may start breathing very, very fast and even develop altered sensorium, or may come to the casualty in coma. And that is a life-threatening condition known as diabetic ketoacidosis. Unless this is recognized promptly and managed, it can be have very serious consequences.
And particularly in the less privileged sections of our society, or less aware sections of our society, we are all aware, and you'd be seeing them a fair bit even now where you work, that people are not aware, and the child lands up in the emergency room with diabetic coma, so to speak. And that is something very sad, and it really hurts when you see children who were just missed, even though the symptoms were staring us in the face, because of lack of awareness on part of the parents or the family or the surroundings or whomsoever they went to. No one checked the blood glucose. So, do you see these kind of children in your practice?
Yes. In fact, if I grossly look at all the new diabetics that we get in my own institute, I think every month we would be getting perhaps 1 or 2 new diabetics every month. Majority of them actually present in diabetic ketoacidosis for the first time. And what is sad is, as you very rightly said, even if they, because mine being largely a referral hospital, even at the primary care where they have gone, diabetic ketoacidosis has been missed, and nobody has checked blood sugar, and they have been managed as brain fever or something else. And it's a cardinal rule that we teach all our young doctors, is that you must check blood sugar in every patient who comes with unconsciousness. So there is a lack of that awareness even among doctors, sadly.
So let's go back to Dr. Jaivalikar. Ganesh, what do you think? Why does it happen? Why does type 1 diabetes happen? And you briefly alluded to type 2, but why does it happen at all?
Yeah. So you mentioned in the beginning of the program that type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease. So let me just explain this a bit. So assuming that, if we suppose that our body is like a country and our immune system is like its military. So the job of immune system is to protect and against foreign invasion from bacteria or viruses or other foreign particles. But in autoimmune disorders, the immune system kind of revolts against your own body parts. So in type 1 diabetes, the immune system cells attack the beta cells of pancreas, which are the cells responsible for production of insulin. That is the hormone which is deficient in type 1 diabetes. Now, why this happens is not entirely clear, but the hypothesis or the current understanding is that there are people who are kind of carrying some genes, or there is a genetic predisposition, and on top of that genetic predisposition, there is an environmental insult which triggers this process of autoimmune destruction of beta cells. Now, there have been various candidates for this possible environmental triggers. The strongest association is with some viral infections. However, none of them have been causally proven to be associated with type 1 as of now. Other environmental candidates that are considered are deficiency of vitamin D, or early introduction of cow's milk proteins, or alteration of the gut microbiota, gut bacteria basically. But as I said, that none of these have been proven to be related or linked to the type 1 diabetes. So that remains an enigma as of now. And that is one important barrier in measures for preventing or doing early intervention in this condition.
I mean, that's important to understand that we don't really know what pulls the trigger. You know, the genes load the gun.
Yes.
But in this case, what pulls the trigger? Which is the specific environmental insult? Probably a virus, we don't know. Because if we knew that, we could have developed strategies to prevent this happening.
Absolutely.
And right now we are struggling. There are lots of trials going on. But we really don't have a definite answer as to why some people get it. And type 2 diabetes, as you all know, type 2 diabetes is occurring at a younger age and even in children, simply because changes in lifestyle, increasing obesity, different kinds of food which weren't the norm earlier, lack of physical activity, all those are contributing to early obesity in children, and of course then early onset of type 2 diabetes. And all the panelists sitting here have seen children at the age of 10, 11, 12, not with type 1, but with the adult type of diabetes. So that, although it's a small proportion, but still we need to be alert about that too.
Invariably in these children with type 2 diabetes, there is a strong family history of type 2 diabetes. Yes. So unlike type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes has a strong genetic basis, particularly in children.
So that's a good point. For children, how do you suspect type 2 diabetes, which is the less common type of diabetes in children? If they are obese and if they have family history, very simply, there are others, but we won't go too much into that. But obesity and family history are reasons to check even children for type 2 diabetes. And of course, type 1 diabetes, Dr. Anju explained to you about what the symptoms are like. And it's important that if the child is complaining of those symptoms, we should not sit and wait. We should just get a blood glucose done or ask our doctor to get a blood glucose done if it hasn't occurred to the doctor at that particular time. I think that's very, very important messaging. But, once it has happened and we've reached a diagnosis, how do we actually medically manage type 1 diabetes in children? We won't talk further about type 2 because that is a different story altogether. But the childhood diabetes that we typically talk about is type 1 diabetes. That is the insulin deficient diabetes or insulin dependent diabetes. How do we manage that in children?
So there are 4 important principles, I would say 4 cornerstones of managing diabetes in children. One is insulin therapy. Second is dietary management. Third is a regular exercise. And fourth is monitoring. I'll briefly talk about each one of them. So first, talking about insulin. So as we have discussed already, there is a lack of insulin in these children. So they must be administered insulin from outside. And the goal is to mimic as much as possible the way insulin is produced in the body of a normal individual. So one would actually ultimately aim to have blood sugar in the normal range, that is something between 70 to 150 mg/% throughout the day under variable conditions, which means whether the child is sleeping or exercising or after meals. And one would like to achieve that kind of goal. Now, to achieve that goal, insulin needs to be injected multiple times a day. And that's a very important message to give to the parents, because the first thing they ask is, can my child not take oral medications? Because that's what they have seen adults take.
So unfortunately, we don't have oral insulin.
Yes.
That's another area of research which is still we are struggling with.
Absolutely. No oral insulin, no inhaled insulin, though trials are going on. So our patients need to take insulin multiple injections per day. We also, in some of our patients, have the alternative of giving a continuous infusion of insulin. Those pumps are also available. But that is the first thing, giving insulin so that we are able to mimic the normal physiology as much as possible. Next, the medical nutrition therapy or dietary management. First, I would like to begin by telling our viewers, there is nothing known as a diabetic diet. In fact, the principles that I'm going to reinstate here are the fact that it's a healthy diet, which all of us should be taking. So it's a healthy diet which gets its calories, say about 50 to 60% from complex carbohydrates. By complex carbohydrates, I mean the carbohydrates that's present in our cereals, our pulses, and simple sugars are the ones we eat like sugar or honey. So if we minimize simple sugars in our food and eat most of the diet from complex carbohydrates and have a healthy balanced diet, that's what we need. But in addition, what is important in children with diabetes is that we try and maintain as far as possible a regularity, a consistency across meals in the amount, quantity and the timing of meals. The reason is because every time a child takes a meal, the blood sugar levels go up and we are trying to match it with the insulin. So if we have some consistency across meals, especially in the amount of carbohydrates that a child takes, we are able to achieve a better glycemic control, and we have our dietitians who can help a child achieve that. There are some very, I would say, intelligent children with diabetes who learn to master. They can actually adjust, they can do carbohydrate counting and they can adjust their insulin. But very few of them can do it. So one would suggest, while we aim for that, but till a child or family can do that, it is better to restrict themselves to a consistent carbohydrate diet. This is the only thing that is important. The third thing is a regular exercise. Well, I think every child should play, and more so children with diabetes. It's very important. There's so many benefits. If a child plays, the biggest thing is it's such a stress buster. He's out, he's playing with his friends, and play teaches us so much. But especially in a child with diabetes, it helps control the blood sugar, it helps keep obesity at bay, it helps control their lipids. So if they can have 60 minutes of a regular exercise every day, that's great. And finally, monitoring. They have to make monitoring a part of their daily life, which means self-monitoring of blood glucose at home several times a day.
By the glucometer,
yes,
right?
Yes.
Pricking, yeah.
Self-monitoring at home is by glucometer, so that they need to do several times a day, and they also require periodically to have monitoring done under the guidance of a hospital every 3 to 4 monthly. So these are the 4 principles of dietary management.
Very simply explained by Dr. Anju, such a complex area. It's always a challenge for endocrinologists, pediatricians, diabetologists to manage type 1 diabetes. And if you do a good job from the beginning, you get amazing results. It is 100 years of insulin discovery. And I think this year, and I think this is one of the biggest discoveries in medicine ever. If one were to rank, the discoveries in medicine overall, I would say insulin would rank somewhere near the top, the discovery of insulin. And so not only is insulin important for these children, it is life-saving. If you give insulin at the right time to the kind of children we were talking about, you can save a life. And if you miss insulin deliberately or whatever, or by mistake, you can actually endanger your child's life. So insulin is life-saving, and at the moment, usually lifelong, but we'll discuss a lot more about this when we come back after the break. Welcome back after the break, and I have with me today Professor Anju Seth and Dr. Ganesh Jewalikar, and we are talking about diabetes in children. We spoke about insulin. In my experience, whenever we tell the family, the parents, the grandparents that this disease requires insulin, it creates a furor. I mean, there's a lot of resistance to the idea. And everyone at that point, on the other side of the table, feels that there must be some other way. There has to be an alternative to insulin. How can it be that my little child, my beautiful child, my lovely child, actually has to take these pricks to treat this condition? And it's probably there, and my doctors don't tell me about. So Dr. Ganesh, are there any alternatives to insulin? What do we do?
Yeah. Unfortunately, as of today, subcutaneous insulin or insulin injections, either by insulin pen or syringe or by insulin pump, is the only way to treat type 1 diabetes. It is natural on the part of parents to feel, and often people do try alternative medications, or they do search for all sorts of things in vain to have an cure, which is not there actually as of now. This is with respect to alternative therapies. So as of today, there is no evidence that any of the alternative treatments work for type 1 diabetes.
So what do you mean by alternative treatments?
So there are, I mean, people try different streams of medicines like Ayurvedic, homeopathy, Unani, magnetic benches, and some naturopathy, and so many different things. Because at that stage, the parents are in a psychological state where anybody says anything to them that try this, this so-and-so got better because of this. Invariably what happens is that such treatments coincide with what we call as honeymoon phase of type 1 diabetes, where naturally the insulin requirement goes down for a period of time, and parents do think that actually these treatments are working. And after a period when the honeymoon phase is over and the blood sugars start rising again, they again get disappointed. Often people spend lakhs of rupees in these kind of treatments, which I would strongly discourage that people should not do. What is helpful is making the new family or the new child with diabetes meet other well-adjusted senior people with type 1 diabetes who can explain to them, because all said and done, doctors, nurses, educators, medical people saying versus somebody who has gone through the same experience saying and sharing their experience is very, very effective.
We'll come back to that. We'll come back to that. Great. So I think this is important, and in our experience also, if the parents are not anxious, the child is not anxious. Let me tell you, in our experience and in everyone's experience here, if the parents are calm and understand the disease and are willing to accept it for what it is, then the child does not become anxious, and children of such parents do very, very well. It is the parents' anxiety that subconsciously gets transmitted to the child. Children deal with things very well. They can cope very well. So it's important for the parents to be aware and try to understand, and that's one of the purposes of this program. So in one line, do you think things like stem cell therapy or pancreas transplant, another often asked question, maybe this will cure my diabetes, my child's diabetes. How do you answer that?
I tell them, let's keep our hopes afloat. The world is changing. Hopefully, there will be a cure. As of now, please take your insulin. In fact, I don't discourage them very strongly, Ganesh, from trying other things, because they will do it. I would say, okay, please go ahead and try, but please don't stop insulin and don't stop monitoring. And that works. It takes them time to accept the child's diagnosis. In the meanwhile, it is important they continue with their insulin. So I would give them hope. Yes, over time, inhaled insulin may come. Over time, yes, we might get a cure, and let's look forward to that time.
Absolutely. There's a lot of research on in the area of islet cell transplant and pancreas transplant. It has been tried in various kinds of populations and various kinds of patients. But at the moment, it has not reached a stage of success where it can be said as a cure or a proper treatment for type 1 diabetes or diabetes in children. At the moment, worldwide, you may go to the best centers in the world. The answer is to administer insulin. It can be by a syringe, it can be by a pen, it can be by pump, but ultimately the insulin, external insulin, has to go into the system to treat type 1 diabetes. The honeymoon phase you mentioned, Ganesh, I think is very important, because what happens is that when children get diabetes or type 1 diabetes, initially there is a surge of high blood glucose because of complete lack of insulin. They land up sometimes in diabetic coma, God forbid, if you will. Basically, those are the very serious cases. And then what happens is that the pancreas fights back and there is some recovery. So there is a phase when insulin secretion actually improves after we have started insulin therapy. And in that phase, the insulin requirement can drop drastically, close to zero. It may last a few weeks, few months, like that. And in that phase, sometimes patients get the wrong feeling that they may be achieving a cure, or this diabetes may actually be reversing. And it's important to communicate this clearly, gently, yet clearly, that this is probably a temporary phenomenon and they should not stop testing the blood glucose. Because if you do that and suddenly the child lands up in problem again, you don't want to do that. So that is exactly why. And that's where all the alternative therapies come in, as you said. And they say we've sort of reversed it. And this is completely unethical. Completely unethical to say on social media and other media or get on TV and say that I have cured type 1 diabetes, this child has type 1 diabetes and he's now given it up. That is not possible with any therapy that science knows at the moment, right? So let's be careful about that. Let's not fall for these traps and harm our children. I will now come back to more practical aspects again. Let's ask you about monitoring. How do you talk about monitoring. So how do you recommend your patients monitor and what are the tools we can use for monitoring? Monitoring blood glucose or monitoring diabetes overall?
So, talking about self-monitoring of blood glucose, which is an integral component of diabetes management in childhood, there are glucometers available and we train our parents how to do self-monitoring of blood glucose using that glucometer and maintaining a written log. A written log not only contains the blood sugar level, but more intelligent users asking them and training them how to try and interpret if the sugars are high, what happened? Why do they think sugar went high? If the sugar was low, what happened? Because this helps them understand their illness. So they check by a glucometer. Each child must have a glucometer, and that definitely adds a lot to the cost of therapy because each strip of glucometer costs to the minimum 10 rupees or so, at least until I last checked in the market. But they need to do that. There are organizations which can help them by this. But as of now, self-monitoring of blood glucose, and how often? We say as often as possible. Now I recommend to my parents at least monitor 4 times a day, before breakfast, before lunch, before the evening dinner and at bedtime, and also sometime periodically, once in a couple of weeks or so, in the midnight, so that we are not picking hypoglycemia, we are not missing that in the night. In addition, if the child is sick, he needs to monitor more frequently because sickness can affect blood sugar in an unpredictable way. If there is an unaccustomed exercise, and lastly, whenever the child feels symptoms suggestive of hypoglycemia, he must check immediately. We also have another tool which is now available for some of our parents, and that is continuous monitoring of blood sugar levels. So those kind of monitors are now available. The sensor can be inserted under the skin of the child and a recording can be made and one can actually look at that also. So we don't have to keep on pricking the child again and again. One can use a reader to read the values. Of course, that comes at a cost, but that's another way that is available. So this monitoring is critical for the management of diabetes. Apart from that, we also need to monitor at the clinic. So a test that we do very often is HbA1c or glycosylated hemoglobin, which we do once every 3 months or so, which gives us a rough idea of how well the glycemic control over last 3 months have been. We also need to monitor them annually for some other conditions, especially when the diabetes becomes a little longer.
Sure. So sort of nice algorithm explained there. And I will now go to Ganesh very briefly. What are real advances in management? Like, where has it changed type 1 diabetes management?
I think we have now better insulin, better long-acting as well as better short-acting insulin. The most exciting advances have happened in the field of technology. So now the glucometers are downloadable. You just have to plug it in your computer and it gives a very nice analysis of your blood sugar readings. Also, there are continuous glucose monitoring devices, which now it is possible for a parent to track the blood glucose on their phone. So that makes it very easy for parents to kind of supervise. And in terms of insulin delivery, we are getting better insulin pumps. So now the newer pumps will be able to having a continuous glucose monitor which can talk to the pump, which means that the insulin pump can adjust the insulin doses based on the result of the continuous glucose monitoring. So these are the most exciting advances, and this field is going to get better and better. And I think in terms of these algorithms, the artificial intelligent component is going to be increasingly used in the field of type 1 diabetes. And all this has really improved. Now it is possible to get absolutely good blood sugars and good HbA1cs and lead absolutely healthy life with all these technologies.
So there have been huge advances, as you pointed out, and they are mainly technology based. And of course, we have a sobering thought always that so much of our population can't even afford insulin. So one of the areas for Make in India or promote the health of Indian children with diabetes is to make insulin accessible and affordable to everybody. And a lot of efforts are being made in that direction, I'm aware. So that is really important. And also, I think we have to work on strips that become the glucose testing strips that become much cheaper. I mean, that will really aid our patients and prevent many of them from getting into trouble. I want your comment, Dr. Seth, on two brief comments on 2 points. One is the role of peer support groups. Dr. Ganesh briefly mentioned, and I cut him off that time. And also the role of the diabetes educator, or the sort of, you can say, someone who helps the doctor in managing these children. Can you enlighten us about those?
So a little bit about diabetes educator first. The educator is needed to help our parents and the child learn the diabetes self-management skills. So it begins by actually educating the family about diabetes illness itself, just the basic what goes wrong and why we are giving insulin, and then goes on to teach them the critical skills. The critical skills as to how to give insulin, everything related to insulin, storing insulin, filling insulin, injecting insulin, using pumps and so on. How do you maintain a blood glucose log? How do you manage sick days? How do you manage hypoglycemia? These are some of the critical skills a diabetes nurse educator must train our children and families with diabetes. And after that, it doesn't end there, because parents can also absorb a little at a time. So we need to train them, give these critical skills over several sessions. But after that also, every time the patient comes back for follow-up, they have more sets of questions, and we have to understand those and give a customized kind of counseling every time. So I think at my own institute, which is a government institute, we have taken the effort to get a couple of nurses regularly posted in the diabetes clinic who are doing a commendable job, I must say.
Absolutely.
And they can actually pick up the psychological stress also in the child.
Yes. In fact, in my experience, this cadre of people, the diabetes educators or diabetes nurses, are the ones who make a real impact on quality of care. They make a huge impact on the outcomes. Patients' adherence to treatment, their results and everything. What about peer support groups?
Again, extremely important. Ganesh mentioned, people accepting the diagnosis. For the families to accept the diagnosis, for the child to accept the diagnosis, I think peer support groups are needed to remove something like diabetes loneliness and deal with diabetes stress. It can be a tremendous, it's kind of a life redefining moment for the entire family when a child is diagnosed with diabetes. How to cope with that is the first thing. A forum where a child can share his experiences, learn from experiences of others, is what a support group is all about. And it also, the more robust the group is, it can also help arrange resources. There can be organizations that can pool in together, maybe arrange and give them glucose strips, have some the common diabetes education sessions. So peer support groups can organize that and much more. Basically, it helps a child realize he is not alone in this, and we are all together. It's a collective learning. It's a huge thing towards any chronic disease, but diabetes especially.
So I think type 1 diabetes, as we understand, is a combination. Managing type 1 diabetes is a combination of approaches. It's not just administering medication or giving advice. It's providing support to the child. That support comes from our teams, from the doctors' teams. It comes from family. It comes from peer support groups. It comes from society and environment. But supposing a child gets that support, and many of our children are getting excellent support in this regard. Dr. Ganesh, do you think that the children who've got this kind of support, are they able to achieve everything in life? Do they grow normally? Do they physically, mentally, where can they reach? Or is there always this thing hanging over their head that no, I've got type 1 diabetes and I can't do this and I can't do that?
Yeah. So I think with the current treatment and with maintenance of good blood glucose levels, it is absolutely possible to have totally normal growth, normal pubertal development, normal academic performance, participation in cultural sports activities. There are successful people with type 1 diabetes practically in every field. So, I mean, there is no limitation once they are equipped with adequate education and self-management skills. There are examples of people who have diabetes for more than 5-6 decades and are complication-free, I mean, even in today's date. And these are people who have had not so good treatment in the past. So therefore, I think increasingly outcomes are going to get better and better. Hopefully, at some day, we will be able to also have some sort of some treatment which can cure or at least get rid of insulin. That hope we have to always keep. I would just add to what you were saying about doctor and educator is that in type 1 diabetes, what I have seen is that the treatment is successful if the child is the driver of the vehicle that is being going on, or if the child is, and the role of doctor or dietitian or diabetes educator is like a coach. So, I mean, that is that concept is slightly different from traditional doctor-patient concept, where you just go to a clinic and get a prescription and go back.
Absolutely. Last point before we take a break, and then I'll invite Dr. Partha Kar onto the show. What is the role of schools? We've spoken about the whole environment, but we haven't spoken about schools, which is the most important part, or perhaps one of the most important parts of a child's life.
Yes, I think that's important to cover because child is spending so much time there. Child is engaging in physical activity in school. He's taking meals in school. So schools definitely need to be involved. So most important things, and I would say critical thing, is that first the family informs the class teacher and the school about the child's condition. It should obviously never be hidden from the school. They should know. The school should in turn provide the child a support for blood sugar testing if the child needs to test sugar in the school, should provide a place for storing the insulin, should provide a place where child can safely inject insulin, because a lot of our children do inject insulins in school. And the school teacher should also be aware of how to manage hypoglycemia. They should be aware of symptoms of hypoglycemia, because sometimes they develop so fast the child may not be able to express that he's feeling a problem. So the teacher should be able to make out that this child is having a problem, he may be having hypoglycemia, I need to give glucose, which means the parents of the child along with the school should make sure that somewhere in the school there is arrangement, whether the parents provide it or the school provides it, for checking blood sugar, keeping some glucose ready in school so that it can be administered to the child. These are the bare minimum things. Beyond that, sky is the limit. To help a child, have in between the classes to inject his insulin, give him time to have snacks if it is needed, be able to manage hypoglycemia, be able to inject. There is so much teachers can do, and also motivate to have a healthy eating. Children, the binges happen in school. So if there is a friendly watch that a teacher can keep in the school over the child, I think that will go a long way in helping a child.
So schools need to be sensitized to this and more, and it's something that is unavoidable, and actually it is unethical not to look after children with type 1 diabetes in school, and that facility has to be made available. Training of school teachers and other school staff is very, very important in this regard. We will take a short break, but you please stay with me, both of you, because we'll come back for your closing comments, and I will have a discussion with Dr. Kar from the UK as we join you after the break. Welcome back after the break, and as promised, we have for you Dr. Partha Kar, who's consultant at Portsmouth, UK. He is a diabetes co-lead in the NHSE, well recognized for his work on diabetes and advocacy of diabetes, and one of the very young recipients of the OBE last year. Welcome, Dr. Kar, to the show. And Dr. Kar has a unique position of having experience with medicine in India as well as in the UK. So he is no stranger to India. He is from Kolkata and did part of his medical education there too. So Dr. Kar, thank you for joining us. And we're trying to look at diabetes in children, in particular type 1 diabetes. Now, what areas do you think that the NHS is adopting now, or you in your practice are adopting now, which would help us further enhance our delivery of care to our patients with type 1 diabetes?
I think, so first of all, thank you for the invite, Amrish, always appreciated. I think first of all, I would say is the topics you've already touched upon as part of this session is awareness. I think that's a big, big thing, trying to sort of get past the stigma and trying to make people understand that this is not the same as type 2 diabetes. This can't be just cured by a new diet or by doing yoga or whatever. I think that's extremely important. So I think that in itself, so when the whole controversy erupts around people saying that you can cure this and cure, in one way it's good because it actually focuses the debate, and a lot of clinicians like your good self come out and say, actually, this is not the same as type 2 diabetes. So I think that's a fundamental thing that would be the first thing we are trying to do here as well, is that making clear is very, very clear about the different types, and the approaches need to be different. It's not the same as, oh, we'll do a prevention strategy, etc. So I think that's the first and probably the biggest thing I would say, which changes the narrative for doctors and those also living with type 1 diabetes.
Great. So the importance of distinguishing type 1 and type 2 diabetes in children, which translates into different kinds of management, and the fact that it is not a regular, or one may say the common garden variety of type 2 diabetes, which can sometimes be temporarily reversed or go into remission with diet or weight loss. The approach is totally different here. So I guess that, of course, that awareness, that education is very, very important. But you use a lot of technology in your practice. We are using a lot of technology. Increasingly now, we are using technology in the more affluent classes of our patients, of course, not always accessible to everybody. But it has made a big difference in the quality of care I feel that we provide. What's your feeling about that?
So I have always said, and I've actually, I remember us doing a talk at some stage where we talked about the importance of self-management. And that self-management isn't just for the person with type 1 diabetes, it's also for our own selves as clinicians. And what do you have with technology, whether it's these new monitors where you don't have to prick your fingers, or you have an insulin pump, so the delivery systems are different, it just makes the self-management better. So that's been a big explosion in the UK and the recent 3-4 years, huge rise. Of course, it's slightly unfair to compare the NHS with a vast country like India, with all of its dynamics, and the population doesn't even compare, to be honest. But I think there are lessons there about the role technology can play. So my view of technology is that it helps your self-management better. And for us, it makes it, as clinicians, it makes it slightly better as well, because you can look at the readings, you can see the patterns, you can probably give better ideas. So I think technology has made a huge jump forward in type 1 diabetes. And I think there's a more closer association in the mind of clinicians that technology and type 1 diabetes are pretty much together. And I think that's an important aspect as well.
And the two most important technologies that we are all using now are really continuous monitoring of glucose. That has changed the way we used to look at blood glucose values. That gives us curves and dips and highs and lows and valleys and peaks, where we can adjust the insulin and the diet and the exercise much better. So one big advance, if I were to say, is the continuous monitoring technology, which is now increasingly available in India also. And the other, of course, is delivery of insulin, better quality insulins and delivery of insulin, which of course has moved in India from syringe to pen largely, but still the adoption of continuous infusion technologies like pumps is limited, and that is of course determined to a large extent by the cost of these technologies. So yes, I completely second that, and I think technology is for patient empowerment and helping the doctor take better care, not technology for the sake of technology. There are patients who do so well on multiple insulin shots, everything well controlled. We don't have to necessarily push them onto a pump, and other way around. There are others who will require a pump, but there seems to be no way. Yes, Doctor. Yes, Partha, please.
I always give the example, the simplest example I can give is how technology has evolved, let's say, with mobile phones, the iPhones and all the, everything that we've got. And you have the same thing with glucose monitoring. It was what, in the 70s that we used to dip our urine to find out what's happening to glucose. Then we went to finger pricking. So this is your natural progression that more continuous glucose monitoring. So it's non-invasive. You don't have to prick yourself or invade your skin to do that, so to speak, technically. And then obviously the same thing's happening with pumps. So similarly, the analogy is that I think technology is moving ahead throughout the world, whether it's our TV screens or how we watch movies and everything. And type 1 diabetes and technology is also moving at exactly that same pace. So it's just evolution of time as we go along.
So one of the things that that India picked up late was the role of paramedical or non-medical staff in assisting, and now that's become really popular, rightly so, is increasing, but we need much more of it. And the difference that I found in the care provided, I'm talking of 10 years ago maybe, or 15 years ago, in countries like the UK and the US, the care provided to type 1 diabetes was not so much technology or anything. It was the fact that they did not have to connect with the doctor for every small issue. And doing that is impossible sometimes to access the doctor. Secondly, the doctor may be just too busy with so many other more important things. So how do you fit this in, the role of the ancillary, I shouldn't really say ancillary, actually the most important health staff in this, the diabetes educator or diabetes nurse, if you will?
So I think I always go back again to the point. So first of all, I mean, the biggest problem in healthcare is workforce, whichever country you look at. I mean, look at, for example, the NHS spends so much time, effort, and depends on people from India to make their NHS run. If tomorrow, by a stroke of magic, all the Indian doctors and nurses left, the NHS will not exist. It's as straightforward as that. And India has similar problems. Right? So I think when you have that challenge, you have to look broader as to who else could help you. And I think this is where colleagues like, whether the nurse specialists or pharmacists, what we want to do is, it doesn't matter who provides the care, as long as they have the training and they can help with the self-management. So in the best will in the world, we would love to have more time with our patients. I know, we just can't. It's the volume that we have is too much. So the more we can encourage other staff to, especially you mentioned the role of educators, it goes back to the point I mentioned about self-management. People live with their type 1 diabetes 99.9%, if not more, on their own, without any input for doctors and nurses. So in that case, the more we can improve their self-management skills, whether it's with technology, whether it's with education, you will lessen the load on doctors as well. So I think there is a two-way street. The ancillary staff or whatever you say, I think they're all nursing colleagues, pharmacists, educators, etc. Podiatrists, they're all fundamental part now of the diabetes package. And it has to be, because as doctors, there's not enough doctors or not enough trained doctors as well. So that is an absolutely important component going ahead.
So as Dr. Kar is pointing out here, it's all about empowerment of the patient. It is empowerment of the patient that determines outcomes in all diabetes, but in particular in type 1 diabetes. And when we say empowerment, we mean that all training, education, the correct mindset, the skills, the resources to look after oneself and to know how to do that. See, the patient is the one who's going to be with diabetes 24/7, right? Who's going to be dealing with the pricks and the testing and everything. Whereas what can a doctor do? Who can advise once in a few weeks, once in a few months? The educators and diabetes nurses fill that gap to a large extent. But ultimately, as Dr. Kar very neatly points out, it's all towards empowering the patient or the family to take care of themselves. That is the way forward to success in managing type 1 diabetes. Dr. Kar, about schools in the UK, do you have an established paradigm for schools to handle children with type 1 diabetes?
Yes, we do. Nowadays, we do. And I think we've learned along the way that I think schools hold such an important role. I think from the start of the diagnosis, because they can be quite good, if you educate your teachers and other people about some of the signs of type 1 diabetes, because we know type 1 diabetes tends to present quite late. They get admitted to nursing homes or hospitals quite ill. So we talk a lot about, for example, school children losing their concentration in class, going out to the toilets a lot, drinking a lot, and we say, have you thought about type 1? Maybe needs to see their doctor, flag it with their parents. So that's been a big part of it. And I think the other part has been simply about making sure that the children are not stigmatized, that make sure that, they are aware of some of the technology changes, they're aware of the need for insulin injections, how to look after them if they've got a hypo. So some basic stuff. And I think going back again to the central point, it's about making sure that child with type 1 diabetes is identified well. And when you know you've got somebody with type 1 in your school, you make sure they're part of the whole school class. They're not isolated that, he's got this and that and we're not going to play with him, whatever. So you make sure they're having a completely normal school life. So I think teachers and schools, huge role to play in every aspect of type 1 diabetes, given that majority, of course, is diagnosed in that age group. So for us, it's been a fundamental part of working with schools. We work with the education sector and the ministry concerned as well. We even did a comic book, which was...
Yeah. So I think very important points about schools being made there, and we need to understand this and get as many schools as possible in the loop to implement these strategies. Of course, the NHS, as I'm aware, provides insulin to all type 1 diabetes. And of course, I think everyone is automatically insured in that system. So we have to work harder and harder to make sure that insulin is accessible to all our patients. Good care is provided to children with type 1 diabetes. As we are approaching the end of the program, I would like messages from my co-speakers, co-panelists. Let's start with you, Dr. Ganesh. What is your message if you have to give a one-line message?
So I think when somebody gets type 1 diabetes, I've seen that the life revolves around type 1 diabetes. So I would just like to say that type 1 diabetes is just a part of your life. You have to manage type 1 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes should not manage you. So that should always be there at the back of the mind.
I think in the same way that Dr. Kar was saying that it's about self-empowerment. You get used to the idea, you manage it smartly. Don't let the disease, control you. Once you have a handle on it, you'll be leading a normal life, doing what you like, and having control over your diabetes too. And from you, Dr. Seth, what is the message to our viewers?
I'll go a step back. I'll urge the parents and the doctors to be aware. Any child who has increased thirst, increased urination, and increased appetite and is still losing weight, think of diabetes. Do a blood sugar.
Great. Is Dr. Kar back? Then we can have one last comment.
Yes, I'm back.
Yes, one last comment and before we close.
Nowadays. A last comment from me, I think awareness. And once you have raised awareness, try and work as hard as possible to make sure, I think give the message, with type 1 diabetes, nothing is impossible. You can play in the Champions League football final, you can be in the cricket coach, you can be the captain of a cricket team, you can be the prime minister of a country. There is no obstruction to what you can do. And we should all try and make their lives as possible, as normal as possible, and help people along the way. That's my message.
Thank you very much. And I'll conclude here by saying my message is, please don't stop your insulin by reading or listening to various opinions and case reports in the media. Please make sure you ask your doctor about your insulin. Do not give up insulin if you're a child with diabetes or if you're a parent who has a child with diabetes, which is type 1 diabetes. We should not try to give up insulin on our own. That can be really dangerous. I think we've covered a fair amount of ground in this discussion. We spoke about diabetes in children, the types of diabetes in children, what is type 1 diabetes, what are the symptoms, why does it happen, how do we manage it, the role of insulin, the role of all our support staff in helping our patients to take care of themselves, the role of the patient, the family, the environment, the school. I think I would like to thank my panelists, Dr. Partha Kar, who joined from Portsmouth, UK, Dr. Ganesh Jevalikar, and Dr. Anju Seth. Thank you very much for such a lively and enlightening discussion. Thank you.